All right, everybody, what's going on? Chris Rodriguez here from Praxis, and I am here with Ryan G from 2020. And this is a conversation that we were planning on having on the couch in the port. But obviously, since then, the world is upside down, and we are doing our social distancing. Like, wow, just this seems like just the perfect time to still have this conversation. Yeah, G, if you want to just tell everybody a little bit about you.
I guess something that I do normally at the church, I'm having to do online now, is I work with middle school students. Been doing that for it'll be 4 years in July, which is crazy to think about. And so been doing that, work with some amazing leaders that are in Praxis, and yeah, just working from home now.
Yeah,
trying to disciple people online, which is super weird.
Yeah. Oh, okay, so on Tuesday night you had your last night you had your last meeting, or your first meeting virtually. Tell me about how that went. Yeah.
It was fun. It was honestly like way more nerve-wracking than speaking in front of people. Like recording yourself on a camera is weird. I don't know how people that are influencers or vloggers do it, because it's just really intimidating to like stare into a camera and feel like you're performing in front of no one. It's weird.
Yeah.
It's weird. There's no interaction, no feedback.
We're like learning these new skills that like 2020 already knows how to do. You know?
Yeah.
So,
every kid that's grown up
but
on the
no,
internet.
I'm glad it yeah. Yeah. No, I'm glad it went well, and I'm just so grateful for the way that you're figuring out ways to provide solutions to like still connect with these kids and give them Jesus. I just wanted to kind of just come out the gate and just kind of ask you a few questions about just kind of your childhood, and just you as you were younger, right? This whole thing of like anxiety and depression and mental health. I don't know about you, but for me, that was not something that we really talked about in a Christian house, or even in my church. I'm interested to know your earliest encounters were with that.
You know, again, like I'm not an expert on mental health, nor do I claim to be, or have had to go through any, diagnosed like mental health issues. And so I'm no expert. I guess so can I speak from my experience, but I think there's this expectation, especially going to a Christian private school, of like, hey, your grades and your faith are connected, which is weird. It was unsaid, and it was never like explicitly said like, hey, like, but there was always this big like weight of like, hey, like, you're Asian, you're smart, right? It's like, I don't know. Like, and my parents didn't want that for me. They wanted me to grow up as like, my parents grew up going to Chinese school and public school. And so they had this high expectation from my grandparents, this unsaid expectation of like, you have to be a certain way, or you have to your faith has to be strong, or your grades have to be up. And so if you can't meet that, like, there's something wrong. And so I think for me, like, even though I know my teachers, even though my parents, even though, my pastors and my youth group leaders never like wanted to put that unnecessary pressure on me, I always felt that internally of like, wow, like there's all this expectation for your faith, for your school, for the way your life looks. And if it's not meeting that, like, what does that mean? Is that something wrong with everyone else, or is that you? And so I think I internalized a lot of those expectations for myself, and just had this kind of like an overwhelming sense of anxiety of like, or this kind of unconscious like feeling of like, am I doing enough? Like, am I or am I missing the bar? And so there's always this weight, kind of this burden I didn't have language for, I guess, until I got older.
Yeah. So I hear you saying another thing of just like, so there's these moments and these experiences that happen and these expectation, whether they're spoken or unspoken, that kind of in our minds we start to create like a story, right? And there's nothing wrong with like, you know, telling ourselves a certain narrative, a certain story about, hey, this is the way the world is. This is the way I should interact with the world. This is who I should be. But sometimes we start making these choices that are based off of this narrative, that are based off of this story, but that aren't necessarily the most true narrative story or the true direction. As you got older and you started to get some more language, talk to me a little bit about some of that.
Like I was pretty privileged. Like I grew up in a great environment. You know, there was unhealthiness there, but like I think growing up in that, and then going off to, you know, doing community college, interning the church, and going off to Bible college, you know, I was still kind of in that bubble of, you know, this narrative I gave myself of like you need to make this expectation for yourself, or you need to match this. And this thing of comparison came in of like looking at my life versus my friends' lives and just like not experiencing my life as it was, wishing it was something else. So I think especially when I got into, you know, after I graduated from Bible college and like grew a lot there as an individual, like going away to college and living by myself and meeting people I've never, like moving to a state I knew no one, like that was some of those growing period for me of like I'm becoming my own person. And I think in Bible college, like there was a lot of growth and health that for me individually, like that just forced me to like create a new narrative because I had no foundation there, so I had to create that. And so that was kind of like a really growing period for me in college, especially going to, it was a private Bible college, but it felt more like a community than it did like, not to crap on Redwood Christian, but like it just felt different than any other private school I went to. And there's still some unhealthiness that I see now that was there of some legalism or people that hadn't dealt with their own stuff. But overall, I had to grow as an individual, and then kind of coming back home and, you know, after college, you feel the sense of like more expectation because you're like, I got my degree, like, and now you have to become, you're like, now I'm a real adult. Like now I got to provide and doing long distance dating with Amber and like really thinking about like how am I going to provide for myself and like eventually get engaged or married. And you start asking yourself those questions, and I think you always have a plan or a narrative. You tell yourself like it's going to be this way or God's going to provide in this way. Sometimes those things work out that way, but most of the time I think there's like a sense of like accepting where you're at and learning that life is really a journey and a process that a lot of times unpredictable. And we like to do in our minds is we like to predict the future or like regret the past, and we're not able to accept the reality of the situation and like move in the reality of what is and not like what we wish it was or wish it will be. It's like living into what is happening now. And I think we can get into like present stuff more, but like I feel like that period of like after college, going through college and after college was like really having reality hit in of like, okay, like I need to rediscover something again, or like I need to figure things out because there's even more expectation, or there's different expectations when you're becoming an adult or you're finishing school.
There's this kind of piece, like, you know, we hear this, we hear the all the scriptures about, you know, the foolish people who built their houses on the sand versus the wise builder who builds their house on the rock. And as Christians, we know that rock is Christ. But something that we don't talk about is as we're building our house and our framework on this rock, which is Christ, we start to experience different things. And we start to maybe have new question, or we might have ideas that maybe were a little adolescent, but now we're experiencing this new reality. Still Christ being our rock and our foundation, but maybe maybe the window's broken and it's time to replace it. Maybe it's time to, open the doorway, pull out some baseboards, because some of the building materials that we use, they aren't strong enough for these new experiences, right? And it sounds like you went to college and you experienced like, wow, how am I going to be a Christian as an adult on my own, right? And then you come back and you're like, now I have to continue to prove myself as this new adult Christian. But just from some of our conversation, I know that framework of having to prove yourself, it only lasted for a certain amount of time, and then some things started to change a little bit for you. I would love you to share some of that.
Yeah, I think I said I wasn't going to get into much of my college, but I think it's kind of important to like speak into where I am now. So like after graduating from Bible college, like, okay, my dream, was like, hey, I'm going to be a pastor at the church I grew up at, which is 3Crosses. That didn't work. So I was like, okay, maybe I need to expand my horizon. So I started applying to churches everywhere, got interviews, got rejected. 6 months of nothing fall into place, and you start questioning yourself, you start questioning God of like, did I waste my time, or am I wasting my time? Like you said, like things in your house start breaking and you're just like, God, like I'm trusting you. I thought I was doing the right thing. What in the world is something wrong with me? Is something wrong with you? Like, and that was one of the first times I've ever let myself be mad at God. I don't think I realized I was, but like, it was one of the first times I distinctly remember saying, God, you don't know what you're doing. Like, it was one of the first times I was like, God, I don't want to talk to you. Like, I'm pissed at you because I thought this was what you wanted me to do, and I did it. And so it's like kind of that narrative we tell ourselves, like, if we just do the right things, we'll get the reward. Like many times we discover in life, just because you do the right thing, or you think you're following God's calling or his will, or you think you're choosing the right thing, doesn't always mean life's going to be easy, or that things will unfold the way you thought they were. And so I think that was something growing for me.
Yeah, so you had your Job moment.
Yeah.
Where you're like, man, all this bad stuff is happening. And then he starts like questioning God. And I think a lot of times we get this misconception that like, don't get angry, don't question all this stuff. What's wrong with you? Why are you questioning God? Almost like we put them in this small little thing of our God can't handle it. But what we find in our life is that like when we get angry, when we begin to question, God is big enough and he can handle it. He's got answers for us, and they're not always the ones we want. But then you end up after all this time, you start working at this church, and we actually start working at the church around the same time. And you step into a ministry that in a lot of ways is kind of the heartbeat of 3Crosses. There's a lot of overlap in other ministries. Like obviously my people at Praxis, most of them are volunteers there. A lot of people come up through 2020 to go on to other ministries, and it really is an important ministry for our church. And you go in and you take over, and you're doing a great job at it. this is the blueprint. This is the ministry we want to follow and we want to look at. Like, it seems like God is blessing you, but in this moment of like God blessing you and your faithfulness and your ministry, some new things start to happen in your world, and I would love for you to share about that.
I think something that ties in to now and kind of getting the job at 3Crosses was, and just kind of like the culture of like church world and faith and home and school, was definitely like you highlight the good stuff in your life, like the blessings from God, like you show gratitude for that, but you don't show the pain. You don't deal with the hard emotions of like sadness or disappointment or stuff like that. And so I think for me, like trying to shut down those negative emotions, like from an early age to getting this job, having success and like working, like doing the job I wanted to do, that like I went to school for, and like having to wait and then finally getting it, like you get into this like this mindset of like everything's fine, everything's great, like, but I mean, everyone always uses this example, but like for the iceberg there's something deeper, and so on the surface everything looks great, whether it's your life or your ministry or your job, but like there's so much stuff unsettled underneath. And so for me, it was like after a year working in church, like I could definitely say like that became my identity. And there was, Amber and I have talked about this a lot, like there was this kind of like weird sense of like my job is who Ryan is and Ryan is his job. And there's this sense of like a lack of dependence on God, a lack of investment in my marriage, a lack of investment in my immediate family. And because of those habits and those unconscious things that I wasn't even aware of were happening, it started to pick at like the very deep wounds that I had. And, eventually I started seeing things in myself, not even in my circumstances, but like internally I started seeing cracks in myself of like, man, like I'm getting stressed, like I'm just, okay, I gotta work harder. If I'm feeling stressed, I just need to work harder, work faster. And I started to realize like, man, I'm starting to get really like feeling like I'm always tired, like I'm always feel rushed. And so I started to see like these patterns that were maybe I've always had in my life, but even being more pushed to the limit because I'm in this high demanding job as a pastor. And so I started to see how these things that I was doing, even good things, were eating at who I was as a person and eating at my relationships and even eating like, and just like I was giving more than I even had and I was even capable of. And so, eventually, I can get into it, but it kind of like my body broke down because like, if you don't take care of your car, you don't change the oil, you don't rotate the tires, like eventually your car is just gonna break down and not work well, or just, and so that's kind of what I did to myself after a couple of years into working my job.
So probably a year prior to you having this moment, right, I had a similar moment where I was kind of just burning the candle at both ends, really trying to, push a lot of things for Praxis, trying to, build a business for myself and like, teach a bunch of classes at different places and all these things. And I had this moment where I broke down and it got me in, into therapy. And my therapist, he talked to me about this, this picture of this cup. He's like, imagine you are this cup and you have energy, and everything that you give, yourself to, comes out of this cup. And he drew like, where are you at right now? Is your cup empty? Is your cup, halfway? Is it full? Is it overflowing? Is it broken? And I felt like, my cup's kind of empty and leaking. And I feel like I'm giving myself to all these people and, good things, but not really taking care of myself. And I hear you saying that that's something that happened to you. And talk to me about kind of some of the ways you process through that.
This is where when I was realizing, like, man, like I'm doing this job and I love it, but I don't have much more to give. And so eventually I was like, okay, like I needed to go to therapy, because I was like, I had friends that had gone and like spoke well of like, hey, this like really helped me personally or helped me in my marriage. I'd always been interested, but I was like, I'll eventually do it. And I put it off for months and just said I would do it, but never was too busy. And it's like, no, I got stuff to do that are more important. But eventually I got into therapy. I think it was May of last year. It was funny because things actually got worse. My therapist said, kind of an example of like you were stuffing all these clothes into your closet and all these things for most of your life, like most of your childhood, most of your adulthood has been stuffed in this closet. And now, because you're actually wanting to deal with it and bring it to God and bring it to consciousness and bring awareness to it, you're slowly opening it. And eventually when I started slowly opening the closet, like crap started falling out. And
Yeah.
so as I started to realize, man, I have a lot of hurt that and a lot of pain I've never dealt with, even though like I had a great childhood. I had great parents. I had great leaders and people in community, but I hadn't let myself feel the pain and the kind of like the disappointment that I felt towards my parents, or I felt towards myself, or towards God, or towards my friends. I never let myself actually feel that. And then when I started to let myself feel that, I was like, oh man, like there's so much stuff in this closet that I did not know was there. And so eventually when I was seeing my therapist, Rob, learning like, man, this is really hard. This is like too much. It almost seems like this seems counterproductive. Like to go back to things in the past or to go things currently that are difficult to actually like deal with them. Like I would rather just push through and like I'd rather just like pretend they're not there. But one of the best things I've ever heard was a quote from Pete Cazzaro, who's like a pastor and a writer. And he says like, the greatest commandment Jesus gives us is to love God with all your heart, to love your neighbor as yourself. And you can't love God, you can't love your neighbor if you don't have a self to give. And I think for me is like I was realizing I didn't know who I was, because I didn't let myself realize all the experiences I've gone through and let myself feel those things. So I pushed down a lot of who I was because I didn't want to feel the painful stuff and the ugly stuff. And so kind of it took me to like go to therapy, but actually things started to like come out of this, like all this baggage started to come out, and like it culminated to like burnout and just some crazy stuff that for me it was just like very hard to go through.
I'm really grateful for you taking some time to share what's going on, and what's just kind of your perspective with us. I'll be praying for you and thinking about you and your and just in 2020 that you kind of continue to find creative tools and solutions for kids to know that they're loved and connected. Thanks for your time, and thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening.
Bye, guys.